And welcome back to Morning Magazine. This is Michael Klisch. Our next guest from RR Auction, Bobby Livingston. Good morning, Bobby.
Good morning, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you on board. We have talked before. I know I've talked to people from RR before. You've had some really interesting stuff up for auction, but this may be the best of all.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. We do get to see the most interesting, historically significant letters and papers come through our auction house. We've been doing it for 30 years. Every month, we seem to have something that's neat. So I'm glad that you think this Nixon archive is something fun.
Well, I'm a political junkie. But now Nixon, I've read much about Richard Nixon, and now he, his speeches, they weren't off the cuff, but he worked from like notes or stuff rather than a prepared speech like Ronald Reagan or JFK would. So this is quite a find just for that reason.
Yeah, absolutely. Interestingly, we've had little speech notes, not in this archive, but you're right. He never wrote out full, long sentences. He would just do talking points kind of in a scratchy handwriting of his own that he would use out on campaign stops. Neat stuff. This is an archive from a gentleman named Paul Keyes, who was a joke writer on the Jack Parr show when he met Nixon in 1960, and they became friends, and Nixon brought him into his inner circle, and he became his gag writer and advisor on how to act. So it's a pretty compelling and interesting thing to read through, because it does go from 1962 all the way through to the resignation, basically.
And well, for the benefit of our listeners, you've got a consultant's 10-page report.
Yeah, it's an incredible 10-page report that Nixon has gone back to underline the things that he wants to, that are the points that meant something to him, and also left some notes for Mr. Keyes. So it's a really fascinating look on the re-imaging of Richard Nixon, and it takes place in 1967. So this is after the famous debates with John F. Kennedy, the defeat of Nixon for the 1960 presidential election, the defeat of Nixon in 1962 with the governorship, where he said you won't have Dick Nixon to kick around anymore. So at this point, he's probably the lowest of lows, but he's hearing, he's gearing up to announce his candidacy for 1968. So it's a fascinating document where the consultant has said you're stiff. You have a certain amount of tension. Your gestures are often too frequent. And Nixon has underlined all these things, to learn how to come across better to the public. The consultant writes, Nixon frequently clenched fists indicate tension, even belligerency. Loose fingers hanging downward from bent wrists moving toward the camera and a swing motion are confusing and have grotesque connotations. And Nixon has circled all these things. So it's a fascinating look at Nixon's on-camera personality.
I'd read many years ago the Kennedy debates, which experts and people listening to it on the radio thought it was a draw, but people watching it on TV gave Kennedy a win. Better than one of the reasons was he looked a lot better than Nixon. Nixon had been ill and he'd lost weight. His clothes were ill-fitting as a result, and he was very pale. And he talked to a Hollywood makeup expert, and how I need to look better on television. What can I do? And the makeup expert said, well, frankly, the best thing you can do is get a tan. And Nixon went out and bought San Clemente like the next day.
As he should have.
Yeah.
Because if I've seen the footage, of course, I'm too young to have seen it, but the way Nixon sweat, they made a big deal out of it. And Kennedy's father was involved in Hollywood and was a producer, had financed films, so they understood the power of the media and makeup and good fitting clothes. They're much more media savvy, and it's one of those things that they think swung the election for Kennedy. Obviously, was those debates. Yeah.
And he needed a sense of humor, so he goes out and tell us about this guy, Paul Keyes.
Well, Paul Keyes was a writer on on the Jack Parr show, went to work on Nixon's '62 campaign, and then got involved back into Hollywood and ended up being an executive producer, I guess, with Laugh-In. And he's the one that got Nixon to come down to Laugh-In and deliver that famous phrase, "Sock it to me."
Yeah, actually, the way he said it was, "Sock it to me."
I think I read up on it, and he actually did 6 takes. You know, so that's the best one. But it really, they say that Keyes getting him onto Laugh-In really reintroduced him to a younger generation and humanized him from being that anti-communist Alger Hiss kind of guy.
I think that was a brilliant political move. It's sort of like when Clinton went on Arsenio Hall playing the saxophone.
Right, where America could relate to him. And so Nixon was kind of self-parodying himself, and it really worked. And Keyes is really responsible for it. So it's a fascinating connection.
It is. And now tell me about how this auction is going to work.
Well, the auction ends next Wednesday. You just go to our website, rrauction.com. You register; it's free. We've got the Nixon archive and about 1,500 other authentic autographs and letters and manuscripts for sale from all the presidents, scientists like Einstein, Beatles, people like that. And you just bid online, and if there's something that you enjoy, I mean, it's neat just to go to our website and check stuff out. Anyway, I have the best job in the world. I get to look at this stuff every day.
Must be like for you being on the Antiques Roadshow every day.
Yeah, it's Michael. It's one of the most incredible things is to open up the boxes that come in here every day, and you pull out a letter from Abraham Lincoln, or you learn something every day.
What is Nixon? Now I know Nixon doesn't seem to be as collectible, certainly, as Ronald Reagan or JFK, but what is his stuff going for on the market?
Well, there's a lot of it. Like you said, he's just not as desirable as a Reagan is. So his signature on a book, $200, $300, $400. Reagan maybe double that on the right piece. Mm-hmm. I guess because of the controversy of Nixon, he's just not that highly sought after in many ways, which is unfortunate. I mean, I think he was a flawed but great president, very controversial. So as history goes on, it's amazing that Reagan has superseded him, maybe in the eyes of Republicans.
Well, I agree, and the general public too. He's a man of great accomplishment in his presidency. Reagan gets more credit for the breakdown of the Soviet Union, but I think Nixon's trip to China was a bigger factor than anything that Ronald Reagan did. I would add Kennedy's the Cuban Missile Crisis as well as another big event in the ending of the Soviet Union. But the economy was good under Nixon. He ended the Vietnam War. It took him 4 years to do it, but he did end it. I keep waiting for something like happened to Harry Truman. He left office with lower approval ratings than Nixon did. But 20 years later, then the books about Truman started to come out, and it was a big turnaround. Now he's considered one of our best presidents. But I keep waiting for that to happen with Nixon, but he can't get past Watergate.
Yeah, and I don't know how you can. Unfortunately, I mean, he's the only president to resign in office, and it'd be a very difficult step to get over, to get him onto Mount Rushmore, sort of speak, Yeah. He's just not going to get there, I don't think.
Now, so as a result, his memorabilia is not, at this point, going to bring nearly maybe half as much as Reagan or Kennedy or, forget about Lincoln. I couldn't even guess how much something like this from Abraham Lincoln would be worth.
It's incredibly, Lincoln is $15,000-$20,000 for a handwritten letter, even more if it's got great content. Something from Lincoln is vastly more valuable. So obviously,
than anybody's. But it's. Do you get much presidential memorabilia?
We do. We usually have something from almost every president every month. So what's really, Michael, one of the neatest things is that presidents all the way up to Lincoln very rarely used, they had secretaries, but most of the time they did a lot of the paperwork themselves. So you'll get these incredible land grants and military papers or recommendations by the president handwritten out onto documents. So it's really special when you do see something from Zachary Taylor or even farther, George Washington. Thomas. And what's really spectacular is when we get something, and we do it every so often, is, well, Washington was president and Jefferson was Secretary of State, and they would dual sign documents all the time. So these two glorious signatures. Washington had a great flourish, great signature, as did Thomas Jefferson, and there's two of our founding fathers on one single document. Wow. It's mind-blowing stuff.
That's like getting a baseball with Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig's signature on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
So it's special things that we gather here.
That's incredible. Now, how does this work? You do verify the stuff that you sell.
Authentication is something we take very, very seriously, and it's how we've built our business. We guarantee everything that we sell to be authentic forever. So if we did make a mistake, you would always get your money back. But because we offer that guarantee, we do the due diligence to make sure that it's authentic. Because we've been doing it for 30 years, we've seen over 1 million autographs. Every forgery, fake, print, secretarial, auto pen. We've seen the attempts to fool us. So we're really good at weeding out. But if we get it wrong, because we have in-house experts that have seen all this stuff, we also consult with people that are leaders in each field. We've got a presidential expert, an astronaut expert, a rock and roll expert. So after we look at it and we think it's real, we show it to them just to make sure that we get an unbiased opinion that concurs with our opinion, or we won't sell it.
Yeah, good to know. There seems to be, actually, in my opinion, remarkably little fraud, considering how much is sold on the Internet.
There's a lot of it.
Is there?
We see it all the time. Yeah, you'll be very, very careful when you purchase things off of eBay or non-trusted sources. Although, because you can find treasures if you know what you're looking for.
Yeah.
But most of the stuff out there is traced forgeries and things like that, especially on the great names, the spectacular, names out there: Jimi Hendrix, Oscar Wilde, the Beatles. You'll see fakes out there all the time, and unfortunately, people bring them to us. They think they've scooped up a bargain out there, and they'll want to put it in our auction to sell. And we want it to be real, but unfortunately, they got taken.
Yeah, you see that on the Antiques Roadshow. Mostly what they show you are the treasures that people find, but every once in a while, someone comes in with something from the 6th century Ming dynasty that turns out it was made in Hong Kong 30 years ago.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, it is.
Because a lot of people get these things as gifts or they're heirlooms, and they don't want to be told. They don't want to believe it, and it's something that no one wants to believe that they got taken. But it's a difficult thing, and we face it every day here.
Yeah. Well, it's got to ruin your day, particularly if it's a family heirloom handed down for 3 generations.
And Michael, with a story attached, like I must hear. My dad got this for me when he was a policeman at the Beatles concert. The Beatles signed this for him, and it was just a handout that he got from the press people at the Beatles press officer would have handed out these things to people, and so it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking.
The movie stars, apparently, that always comes up. Very few of them actually signed those photos they sent out to people, apparently.
Well, the Hollywood studios would get thousands of letters every day. It was just they had to hire secretaries to deal with the fan mail because it was part of the public relations campaign to contact your fans. But the movie stars very rarely. Some would sign to the mail, but most are secretarials, and we're experts at finding the good ones.
And they can tell, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, Every signature has got unique features to it, actually. So after several years of studying, you can really pick up on a secretarial as opposed to an authentic signature pretty quickly.
Well, I imagine, the secretaries probably signed thousands of photos. They get to recognize which secretary signed it.
I know, it's pretty amazing. People have done studies on that.
Wow. Looks like we need to take a break. Can you hang on?
Sure, Michael.
Listening to Morning Magazine, we're going to pause for just a quick update on the weather here. And it's a beauty. Sunny and 85 today, partly to mostly cloudy tonight, down to 65, and clouds and sun tomorrow, and another high of 85 degrees, 77 degrees right now at WFAW.
It's the WFAW Community Calendar.
The VFW Post 8483 home of Jet on a Stick is having its third annual Custom and Classic Car Show on Saturday, August 27th, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. at VFW 8483 headquarters, Highway CV, just north of the airport. There will be music and fun until 7 p.m. The show supports activities and programs for local veterans, our troops, and their families. Don't forget about the Farmers Market every Wednesday in legendary Lake Mills, with over 50 vendors including vegetables, fruit, bakery, meat, crafts, and concessions. Find it all in Commons Park.
The WFAW Community Calendar is also online at 940WFAW.com. Now, no matter where you are, you can listen to 940 WFAW, streaming online at 940WFAW.com. From the WFAW Morning News to high school and Warhawk sports, Morning Magazine to the Friday Morning Funnies, it's all just a click away. Stay in touch with Jefferson County's news and talk at 940 WFAW, and now streaming online at 940WFAW.com.
And welcome back to Morning Magazine. Michael Klisch, and we're talking to Bobby Livingston from RR Auction, who has acquired an archive of, what is it, Bobby, 81 documents from Paul Keyes?
Yep, 81 different documents from the archives of Paul Keyes, and it's got some pretty neat letters from Nixon when he's running for governor, and Bob Haldeman is his assistant. So there's a lot of letters to Haldeman and Haldeman letters in here too, who would become famous, as a key figure in the Watergate case. So there's also letters from like Diane Sawyer, because she was Nixon's assistant press secretary in the 1970s, which is kind of neat. And there's a letter to Paul Keyes from Regis Philbin in 1962 talking about how he met Richard Nixon with Paul Keyes the week before. So it's a neat little archive.
I would think that that part of Nixon memorabilia. I mean, he had probably the best known White House staff in the 20th century, mainly because of all the trials and whatnot. But names like Haldeman, Ehrlichman, they've got to be pretty valuable.
They're not that valuable, but it's interesting and it's historically significant, I think, that they're here, because these are the guys that are going to go down the road with Nixon. Not only, in this archive, they're re-imaging him, but it's political. They're talking about making jokes about Pat Brown, the governor of California, in these 62 documents. I mean, they're out starting that press stuff to delegitimize a candidate they're facing, and this is something that they would, really torque up by the time the '72 election came around, where they were Haldeman and Ehrlichman are purposefully trying to derail Democratic opponents. So in these documents we have, you can see the touchings of that. There's nothing earth-shattering in these things, but the techniques are starting.
A letter from Spiro Agnew.
Yeah, I guess Keyes got pretty close with Spiro Agnew, and during his indictment and then his resignation, right before his resignation, he called Keyes, and so there's transcriptions of the phone call that Keyes had with him, trying to help him get through this crisis mode. And finally, there's a poignant thank you letter from Agnew, thanking him for his help. I mean, this is right before Agnew resigns in disgrace. But I think that the nice part of that particular letter is that he signs it Ted. I guess that was the nickname of Spiro Agnew. I didn't really know that until I saw this letter today. That it was he signed it Ted. So neat stuff.
Fascinating. Again, these are all such famous names. There are very few presidents that the average person would recognize. A vice president. Well, yeah, even a vice president. We forget about them unless they become president. But his staff and everything else, these are all easily recognizable names. What? Before I forget, how do people bid? What do they do?
They just have to go to rrauction.com. They register. We just check you out, make sure you are who you say you are, and we give you a bidder number, and you can start bidding. It's really easy. So they just go to that site, RR Auction, and the auction ends on Wednesday. So they just go. It's a simple process and free.
All right. And what else you got up right now that might be of interest?
Well, we always have a lot of astronauts, military people, notables, art and literature people. So there's a great selection of presidents. I think one of the things that I like best this month, and one of the nicest things to collect, are checks, like personal checks of presidents.
No.
And so this month we have an Abraham Lincoln check that was written on his Springfield, Illinois bank account on February 1st, 1860, and it's to a famous footwear store in Springfield. And what makes it fascinating is these are the shoes they suspect, because he bought a suit the same day that he goes to New York and he delivers his famous Cooper Union speech that really positioned him as the I want to say a moderate Republican candidate. That really established his candidacy as something real to the people on the East Coast. And so this check is directly related to the shoes that he wore at that speech. So it's neat. It's all made out in his hand on his account, and so it just tells a great story, and they're fun to collect.
Wow. A book came out several years ago now. I did an interview with the author, Lincoln at Cooper Union, which lays that all out. That was, there were three candidates for the Republican nomination in 1860, and Lincoln was the third of the three and way down. Nobody thought he had a chance. He was running against Seward from New York, New York in 1860 had 25% of the population.
Yeah.
And he was the sure winner, but Lincoln went to Cooper Union, was a big hit with his speech there, and then toured the Northeast, which was where the votes were, and of course the rest is history. That book on Lincoln and Cooper Union would be a nice addition to that particular check.
Yeah, it's a fascinating time, because I know that Seward didn't campaign. He was too big to campaign. I thought he went to Europe, and Lincoln totally understood the political climate. He never came out hard against abolition. He wanted to. He was all for the compromise. No slaves in the territories, and really stole the thunder of the Republican Party and was able to win. And thank goodness he did.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. We a lot of people think of Lincoln as the idealist, but he was an astute politician, to say the least.
Yeah, absolutely. So
yeah.
So that's what makes collecting these presidential items fascinating and fun.
Well, yeah, it's like I say, I'm a political junkie myself, and I'm just fascinated by the stuff that ends up on your website.
Well, thanks. You can learn a lot just by reading the letters that these guys have left behind. These great men.
Oh, if you're ever looking for part-time help opening those boxes, give me a call, will you?
I will, Michael. I'd be happy to have you up here. You'd have a blast.
All right. And always a pleasure. Bobby, we'll talk to you again, I'm sure.
Great, Michael. Thank you so much.